Welcome to the Illuminated Path Podcast. I'm your host, Liv, founder of Eno Wellness Collective. My wellness journey started with yoga, which led me down the path of exploring healing modalities like meditation, breath work, sound healing, mindset work, and so much more. This exploration inspired my mission to help others find what lights them up. Get comfortable and curious as we learn from experts, teachers, and creators who are lighting up their communities and living an inspired, expansive life. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Illuminated Path Podcast, and welcome back to a solo episode. I'm Liv, and I'm excited to take you through this episode on a topic that has come up many times in my coaching programs and has been something that's been coming up recently in a lot of my work with clients. And so I wanted to bring it into this solo episode. So we're going to be talking about a topic that I'm sure is very interesting to a lot of you. If you clicked this episode, you probably are either having some sleep challenges, want to learn how to improve your sleep, and this is the perfect one for it. It's going to be a nice, short and sweet episode, and I wanted to dive into 3 specific areas related to sleep: auditing our environment, looking at screens, which is typically the thing keeping us up at night, and then also how do we take an honest look at our stress and how that is impacting our sleep as well. So one of the reasons why I bring up and talk about sleep in a lot of the work that I do is because it really is, I believe, the precursor for a lot of things, right? Even before we look at nourishment, even before we look at movement, self-care, relationships, if we're not sleeping well at night, so many things have a ripple effect. And I'm sure we all have experienced that, being in a rhythm of not sleeping well or having challenges with sleep, and just noticing how that impacts everything that we do, waking up with low energy, impacting our food choices, our movement choices, just our overall mood. And so that is why sleep is such a core pillar in health and wellness, because it is really the baseline, right? Of how do we have better sleep and feel rested and actually be energized? And then how does that impact our ability to perform, to bring our goals to life, to do the things that we say we want to do? It all comes back to our ability to have the energy to do it. So I wanted to start off with sharing an exercise that I do with my clients a lot when we talk about sleep. And that is really just auditing our sleep environment. And so being able to really zoom out and look at your environment and that in which you sleep can be super powerful, because sometimes there's these hidden little reasons why we might not be sleeping at our best that have to do with just the environment that's around us. So if the few of the things that I recommend thinking about and really getting curious about. So there's 4 main areas of the audit that I'll share. The first one is looking at light. What are any light that might be impacting our sleep, whether that's light from an air conditioner, maybe that's light under the door, maybe that's a street light, maybe it's the light on your phone blowing up with notifications. So how is light potentially impacting us? It could even be something like the sunlight coming in really early versus having like blackout curtains as an example. So looking at what light might be waking us up. Similar to light, we also want to look at sound. Oftentimes, sound is a little bit more of an obvious thing that is waking us up. And this can be sound from within our house, right? It can be related to our partner, our kids, the TV. It can be something that's outside of our house, like if you live on a busy street or there's traffic or there's, an ambulance or whatever it might be. It can also be related to, sounds like our alarm going off, notifications. And so just noticing what kind of sounds might be impacting your sleep and waking you up. Similar to that would also be temperature, right? So we're really looking at all the senses here of like what could potentially be adjusting our sleep. And I'm sure many of you have experienced, having to sleep in another place or going on vacation and not sleeping well because the temperature in the room is different from what you're used to. So maybe it's too cold or it's too hot. And so being able to notice what that looks like in your room, and maybe, during certain seasons, the temperature is waking you up. Maybe it's worth getting an extra blanket or a fan. And so again, looking at all of these different factors for our quality of sleep. And then kind of a more fun factor to look at, but I notice people typically want to start here and explore this, is really elevating and upgrading the comfort of their sleep. So this is looking at things like Do you love your pillows? Are they comfortable? Do you love your sheets, your blanket, your bed, the bed itself, right? And how do you create a space in your home environment and specifically your bed environment that is your favorite place, right? We spend so much of our time sleeping and in bed and in our bedrooms, and why not make it the most comfortable, luxurious place? Recently, I upgraded my sheets that I have, and it's the best decision I've ever made. I talk about it every night when I get to bed. I'm like, oh, I'm so love the sheets. I love the bed. I love being, in my bed space. And so how do you, upgrade your comfort in a way that is really just become a place that you can't wait to get into? So those are a couple of the things I recommend looking at for a sleep environment audit. Again, really getting curious about what might be waking you up, what might be impacting the quality of your sleep from an environment perspective. The other thing that, I know is a big challenge for a lot of people is winding down. And it's a very real, part of our days and creating this space from work, from our computers, from our phones, from conversations, and really creating this window that we can use to wind down and create space for ourselves before sleep. And so the biggest thing that comes up, with many of my clients is having phone boundaries, having screen boundaries. And that really can look a couple ways. It can look like a physical boundary. So, for example, putting your phone in a different room. Maybe you don't even plug it in next to your bed. You can plug it in your bathroom or in your closet, where you are physically getting this space from your phone in the night. The other thing that you can do is create some boundaries around when you decide to put your phone down and that time period between that and sleep. So, for example, for me, I like to put my phone away at least an hour before bed, like plug it in and get it away, not really have it with me as I wind down. Maybe take a peek at it, just to make sure my alarm is set. But for the most part, it's away. I know some people that have, way longer periods of time before their bedtime or before they sleep that they put their phone away. So you can just think about this. Maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe an hour. But how do you create this space between looking at your screen, being activated, feeling like in your inbox, being in, Instagram, being in the news, and how do you actually just create this wind down time for yourself that creates a bit of space in your screen to sleep time? And just notice how that impacts your ability to fall asleep, staying asleep, going into deeper sleep, and really creating those boundaries around screens, I believe, are a game changer. And then the third piece, when we think about sleep, because we can have the most comfortable space in the world, the most, the biggest, wind down ritual that gives us, all the calm and ease that we need. However, if underlying all of that, we are living a very high stress life and we are not necessarily switching out of this fight or flight mode into rest and digest, our sleep is going to suffer regardless, right? So being able to not only look at the surface level environment and screens and kind of the external impacts, but also really looking at the internal world and how do we create a life and a nervous system that feels regulated, that feels safe, that feels like it can actually rest and digest. And so that comes from really looking at how are we managing stress? What about what is on our stress sort of level is in our control versus out of our control? And ultimately, what kind of toolkit do we have that we can use and pull from to start to shift us into a more relaxed state? The great news is that there's so many tools in that you can create for your own personal toolkit for stress. Many of the things many of us know, like meditation, like breathing, like journaling, like nature, like staying hydrated, like eating, nourishing foods. There's so many things that can impact our stress. But on a deeper level, really looking at the systems and the decisions and even the beliefs that keep us in this state of stress, right? How are we making decisions? How are we telling ourselves certain stories about what's possible and what's not possible? How are we staying in this state of stress because basically on purpose, right? In some ways. And so I really invite you as you think about sleep. Yes, it's amazing to look at the environmental factors. And yes, we can create really healthy boundaries around our screen before bed. But on that deeper level, really looking at like what is keeping you up at night? What makes you feel like when you wake up in the morning, you feel like you haven't slept, a minute? And how do you create really a lifestyle around managing your stress in a mindful way? A lot of that will come down to how do you create that toolkit, right? And that toolkit is going to be things that really shift you from this active fight or flight mode into that rest and digest restorative mode. And so when it comes to sleep, those are three top things I recommend looking at. The fourth thing, which I will leave you with, is sometimes we think that we need sleep when it actually isn't sleep. And so there is an amazing TED Talk by Dr. Sandra Dalton. I share it with all of my clients, and it's all about the 7 types of rest. The TED Talk, I believe, is called like The Real Reason That We're All Tired. It's a short 10-minute TED Talk, super easy listen, but it basically, shares the idea of sometimes we do need physical rest and sleep. Yes, no doubt. We sometimes actually just need to sleep. However, there are 7 different types of rest that we also might need. Things like sensory rest, like creative rest, like emotional rest. And when we are able to notice that, like, yes, sometimes it is sleep, but sometimes it's other types of rest. Sensory rest, for example, is like if you work in a environment where it's constantly noisy, there's constantly people talking or noise in the background or music or whatever it might be, or you're constantly just listening to a podcast, listening to an audiobook, talking to people, like your senses are constantly activated, you might need sensory rest and just like space versus actual sleep. Right. And same thing as like mental or emotional rest, depending on, certain times or seasons of your life. And so I just want to leave you with that and inviting you to think about rest really holistically, in that sometimes the best thing that we need is rest beyond sleep, right? And really looking at the alternative ways that we can really rest and tune into that sense of ease in our life that might be outside of actually physically sleeping. So with that, as I mentioned, I wanted to keep this one short, sweet, actionable, things that you can take with you and start to explore and reflect on. If this resonates with you, if there's something you've done or that you've tried that's really working well for you to start to evaluate and audit your sleep, would love to know it. And with that, we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please rate and review, and don't forget to subscribe. Learn more at enowellnesscollective.com and connect with us on Instagram at enowellnesscollective.